Rich, good morning. I'm Phil Scaduta. We corresponded back and forth.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
Good to see you in person. I wanted to thank you again personally on behalf of all of us at Donuts in Theology for taking the time to do this. And my wife Patty just wanted to say a word about how we pulled this together.
Hi, Rich. Hi, Chris. So up in the right-hand corner is my brother, Chris, Reverend Chris Renz, and he is a Dominican friar. And to kind of connect the dots of how Phil and I met Richard or connected with Richard is that my brother Chris is very involved in the Blackfriars Gallery in Berkeley as part of the Dominican School of philosophy and theology. He is a professor of theology at the school there and became very involved in acquiring, and I'm sure Richard will go into the history of how these posters were acquired over the years for the Blackfriars Gallery in Berkeley. So my brother Chris was kind enough to connect us with Richard because we felt very strongly that we needed to learn about how the art in the gallery connects with our faith.
Thank you, Patty. One of the many bonuses of marrying my wife was getting Chris as a brother-in-law. Really helped. So, hey, Chris.
It's a blessing for me too.
So, again, Dr. Lindsay, I want to thank you, and just by way of introduction, as Pat mentioned, Dr. Lindsay is program director at the Berkeley Gallery in Berkeley, California. He has a PhD in religion and the arts from the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California. He is the author of Hollywood Biblical Epics, Camp Spectacle, and Queer Style from the Silent Era to the Modern Day. His work with Blackfriars Gallery includes curating and promoting its religious and biblical movie poster collection with first edition movie posters from the golden age of Hollywood, classics of international cinema, and spectacles from the silent movie era. He is the producer, co-writer, and co-narrator of Hollywood Biblical Epics, the podcast. So without further ado, I don't want your intro to be longer than your talk, Rich. So, thank you again.
Don't worry.
And
I
with
just
that,
want to give a shout out to Patty, whose birthday is today. So happy birthday, Patty! Many blessings to you.
Thank you for sharing that, Chris. We needed somebody from across the country to tell us.
and
Always under the radar.
with that, Rich, we turn it over to you.
Okay. Yeah, I want to thank you for having us today. And actually, I'm actually Presbyterian. So I'm and am in care as of this week. I'm in care with San Francisco Presbytery as an inquirer for ministry. And even though I graduated from seminary 20 years ago, so that's a long story. But I'm here in my capacity working with Blackfriars Gallery. This is an academic gallery that's part of the Dominican School of Philosophy and Theology in Berkeley. And it has a collection of material arts related to religion, particularly Catholic Christianity. But one of its coolest features, the one that I love the most, is its collection of biblical and religious movie posters. And so let me go ahead and share this presentation with you. Is everybody able to see the slideshow?
Yeah.
Okay. So these were collected by my late doctoral advisor, Father Michael Morris, and he was a Dominican priest and an art historian, passed away in 2016. This is it's a testament to his Pied Piper-like ability to attract people. The fact that, I'm coming into GTU from a Presbyterian perspective, and I didn't really know anything about Father Morris until one of my friends said, you got to check out one of his lectures on film. And I just checked out his lectures on film, and I was totally hooked. And then just over the course of my first semester, he became my doctoral advisor. So the posters are all first edition originals from films from the golden age of Hollywood. There's some more modern era stuff. I would say modern era meaning like 1970s onward. International films, silent films going all the way back to the first feature films of the 19th and 20th century. So just to show you a couple of these things, a lot of these kind of big epics that we know, like kind of from the 1950s, things that we might still see even on television or on Turner Classic Movies today, started out as silent films. So you had there was a Ten Commandments that was made by Cecil B. DeMille in 1923, and we have some lobby cards from that. There was a version of Ben-Hur that was made in 1925. This big silent epic spectacle. Of course, we have a lot of Golden Age stuff, like these two kind of heavyweights, Ten Commandments and Ben-Hur, these kind of classics that probably everybody of a certain generation and has seen. We have a few more that are kind of more that were common, that came out in that kind of golden era, like Samson and Delilah. Quo Vadis. A lot of people don't know that one, but it's worth seeing if you get a chance to see it sometime on cable or find it somewhere streaming. The Greatest Story Ever Told, the kind of big, lugubrious 3-hour plus Bible gospel story that came out in 1965. And then there's a few more we have that are kind of more interesting for their imagery. Michael collected a lot of these from this very Catholic kind of sword and sandal epic called Fabiola, which it's Italian and has absolutely beautiful posters. And then some of these, that are classic kind of Hollywood sex and violence, Solomon and Sheba, which came out the same year as the Ten Commandments, or The Prodigal. Michael was fond of saying that this one represented America's fear of nuclear missiles for some reason. So anyway, it really is just an incredibly eclectic collection. Here's a few more what I would call modern era, basically post golden age of Hollywood. This fantastic Jesus Christ Superstar that came from Japan. This Jesus of Nazareth that is, if you remember this, Robert Powell playing this, the sort of classic blue-eyed Jesus, or The Last Temptation of Christ from Martin Scorsese. When Father Morris passed away in 2016, he left us this very intricate puzzle to put together in curating in cataloging all of these posters. Including the posters, there are about 800 pieces of movie ephemera. And these were his teaching tools. He started teaching these courses in the 1980s, I think, and 80s and 90s, and you couldn't just sort of Google search for images. If you wanted to have images, and he loved to have a very multimedia kind of class, you had to find this stuff yourself. And so these became really his tools that, and he would have to photograph all of these, put them all up on slides, and do them as, slideshows for all of his classes. And as we put the pieces together, we figured out that there was really a historical arc to the posters and other pieces he'd collected. A lot of the history of film could be told through these religious films. So, for example, one of our prints in the collection, this is one of our prime pieces, is this Passion Play. It was 1898 film, so very, very early on in the history of film. And it's based on the Passion play of Oberammergau, which if you've never heard of it, it's a Passion play that's been put on in Germany every 10 years, going back to the 1600s. You know, it was originally put on by the city to basically celebrate them being spared from the plague. And so they put it on every 10 years since then. But this film was shot on the roof of a hotel in downtown Manhattan. So already you have some movie magic being made, used to create a setting. And what's significant, though, about this movie poster, besides just being a really beautiful lithograph, is that its dimensions are 41 by 27 inches. And those exact measurements became the standard measurement for a movie poster, what's called a one-sheet movie poster, pretty much up until, modern day. A one-sheet movie poster was 41 by 27 inches. So what this is essentially is the first movie poster. And what's remarkable about it is that it happens to be this religious subject, it happens to be a Jesus story, a passion play. A further interest of this particular film was that the producer started showing the film, which was only about 15 or 20 minutes, but he showed it at a Broadway theater. He started padding it out with choirs and pageants, and he started making some money on it. And there was one person who didn't like that, and that was Thomas Edison, who was the patent holder for the movie camera. And Thomas Edison felt that being the patent holder for the movie camera, he had a right to some cut of whatever it was that anybody was making with his camera, which, I mean, sounds ridiculous to us today, but he thought that was absolutely the case, and he would sue anybody and try to take away any films that people were making money off of. So then in the end, he was able to sue and to take away the play, and then the play was then known as Edison's copyrighted production of the Passion Play. So so again, and this is a poster we just happened to have, and Michael knew this whole story, and so he got these posters so that he could tell this story. A further point of interest here is that the film industry started in New Jersey, the American film industry. New Jersey was the Hollywood of the early 1900s. Edison built the first movie studio in West Orange in New Jersey, and he would sort of use patent enforcement of his Edison Trust to use lawyers and henchmen to enforce his patents. And there were some other studios that tried to get away with, not joining the trust. One of them was Universal Studios, which was founded in Fort Lee, New Jersey. But then eventually they decided, the movie moguls got tired of dealing with Edison, and so they decided to leave the East Coast, and they headed out for the West Coast, and that was how they ended up in Hollywood. So it was partially because of their proximity to Thomas Edison in New Jersey that they decided that they were going to go to Hollywood. Might have had something to do with the weather as well. So that's the kind of history we go into in depth in our podcast, Hollywood Biblical Epics, and you can find that on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It's a 5-episode documentary style podcast that tells the history of Hollywood film through biblical movies. We have 3 experts that help us out, that tell the story, really wonderful experts who are, authors on the subject. And then the poster collection, you can see the whole poster collection if you go to DSBT's homepage, dsbt.edu/biblical-movie-poster-collection. If you just look for Dominican School Berkeley poster collection, you can probably find it, Google it. And you can see the whole collection of the framed movie posters, the ones that we have all, set up to, there's more than about 80 of them. And we're working on making those a traveling exhibition so that we can send them out and people can see them in museums and galleries. And we've had a couple of those shows already, and we're working on a couple more. So we're very excited to get them out there in the public and let people see them. So there's all kinds of stories we can tell based on the stories of the films that go with the posters. So this past summer, Father Chris and I had a chance to go to Boston University in the International Conference on Religion and Film, and I put together a presentation called Extra or Star, the Jesus adjacent film in post-war Hollywood. And this features all posters from the Blackfriars Gallery. So it's pretty cool that, we're able to use this poster collection for telling stories about the film. So we'll start with a brief video clip from Hail Caesar, the Coen brothers film. I don't know if people saw that one, but it's a very entertaining film that has to do with Golden Age Hollywood. So let me just show you that real quick. Hopefully everyone will be able to hear this.
Who are you? Todd. You get a hot breakfast or a box breakfast? I don't know. Are you a principal or an extra? I don't think.
So, so I hope people were able to hear that okay. So he asked him, "Are you a principal or an extra?" And he's really not sure because the fictional epic that's being shot in Coen Brothers' Hail Caesar, it parodies these scenes from big budget Hollywood epics of the 50s and 60s. And what the parody gets exactly right is the strange practice during this era of not showing Jesus's face. So the central figure of the Christian faith is shown only from behind. You'll see him from behind. You'll see him sort of at a great distance or at the foot of the cross or behind the cross, or you'll just see him as maybe a hand that reaches out. This was a weird kind of way that they would show Jesus in the 1950s. And I call these Jesus adjacent films. So a Jesus adjacent film is a film that was made during the post-war era that takes place at the same time historically as the life of Jesus Christ, but doesn't feature him as a major character. It may feature his voice or parts of his body, but it doesn't show his face close up. And usually the actor who plays him is not credited. So biblical epics, broadly defined according to genre, were some of the most successful films from the late 40s to the early 60s. So you had Samson and Delilah, Quo Vadis in 1951, Ten Commandments in 1956, Ben-Hur in 1959. Those were all the highest grossing films of their year. So you can just imagine that. Imagine, having these big biblical epics as being the highest grossing film, the Marvel movie or whatever of the year. In 1953, The Robe was the second highest grossing film of 1953. And Demetrius and the Gladiators, which was a sequel to The Robe, was number 3 in 1954. And yet from the release of DeMille's The King of Kings in 1927 to The King of Kings in 1961, which was done by Nicholas Ray, the director of Rebel Without a Cause, there were no Hollywood studio released Jesus films, biopics, passion plays, gospel films, where Jesus would have been shown full on. It's just so happens that our posters for both of the King of Kings are Belgian, so I'm not sure why, but that's just what we have in our collection. So I wanted to keep it real there. The lack of portrayal of Christ did not escape the critics of the day. Christian Century published an editorial lamenting the excess of 3 Hollywood religious epics of 1959, big budget Bible travesties, it called them. They also mentioned the lack of Jesus as a major character. It's not totally fair because Ben-Hur is actually a good movie. These other two, not so much. But what they had to say was biblical religion finds its center in God's revelation in Jesus Christ. Promoters of biblical films want to have their cake and eat it too. They want the distant voice of the master. We don't really allow for the incarnation, a man among men, a servant of his brothers. But they don't want to offend anyone either. And that was Christian Century in October of 1959. So what I've suggested is that well, the Christian Century suggests that Jesus was minimized in order not to cause offense. but I think I have some other ideas, some socio-historical reasons for the Jesus adjacent films of the 50s. So I propose that Jesus doesn't appear as a realized character because he's largely unnecessary to the religious expression of post-war America, represented in Hollywood film. He may appear symbolically, his teachings may appear philosophically, but either as a movie character or an incarnational presence, he's not needed in order to convey the central theology of these films. So, viewing the epics in this context, I suggest there are three culturally determined alternative gospels that are central to these films. What I call the gospel of anti-communism or anti-fascism, the gospel of peace in a nuclear age, and the existential identity gospel. So that may be a little bit of thick, jargon there, but I'll explain it and hopefully it'll make sense. So one of the reasons, I'll talk about, first of all, a couple of the reasons that people say that are theories as to why Jesus wasn't shown during the era. Some people will talk about the production code. This is sometimes known as the Hays Code. This was the censorship regime of the Production Code Administration. It was pretty heavy-handed. They had pre-approval of studio scripts and the final cut of the film. So they could take out anything they deemed objectionable. Okay, and all of the Hollywood studios were subject to this, going back to the 1930s. But the production code itself had no objections to showing Jesus. Its only rules were that religions had to be portrayed respectfully and that clergy couldn't be shown as villains. And the main author of the production code was Father Daniel Lord, a consultant for DeMille's The King of Kings in 1927. So the main author of the code didn't have any trouble portraying Christ on film because the one in 27 portrayed Jesus. It was a Jesus story. So if it wasn't censorship that caused Jesus adjacency, then what was it? So let's take a look at religion in the mid-1950s. And I'm using Will Herberg's 1955 book, Protestant Catholic Jew, as a guide. It's kind of an artifact of observation from the era. So according to Gallup polls in the year Protestant Catholic Jew was published in 1955, Americans reported a religious affiliation rate of 99% at that time. I mean, that's huge. I mean, probably the highest in American history at that time. They reported religious membership as being around 73%. If you compare that to today, where everybody talks about the nuns, NONES, or having no religious affiliation, that's about 28% of the population today. So compare that to about 1% in 1955. But in Protestant Catholic Jew, Herberg notes the contrast between record faith affiliation and the secular nature of the culture at large. He says, by and large, the religion which actually prevails among Americans today has lost much of its authentic content. Even when they are thinking, feeling, or acting religiously, they do not bear an unequivocal relation to the faith they profess. He calls the 1950s non-theological and non-liturgical. His conclusion was that the faith is not in God, but in faith. We worship not God, but our own worshiping. So he's suggesting that the faith of the 1950s was more about kind of membership, and it was more about kind of being American and not being a communist. And so you had, kind of these emblems of post-war Judeo-Christianity, the concerns about communism. This was the inauguration of Eisenhower, which had a float to God. You had Ten Commandments monuments that were being put up, which were also a part of the promotion of the film. And so all these Ten Commandments monuments that you have that people are controversial, that have been put up in front of schools and courthouses and stuff, that was part of the promotion of the film of the Ten Commandments. And then putting "In God We Trust" on the dollar bills and adding "Under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance. And President Eisenhower, who was one of the most overtly religious presidents, he was the first to be baptized in office, was quoted as saying, "America is founded on deeply felt religious faith, and I don't care what it is." So there was a lot of religiosity at the time, but it was about a mile wide and an inch deep. Okay, and that's basically what Herberg is saying. Another major influence, as I said, was the Cold War. And you had a very interesting book by a guy named Jonathan Herzog called The Spiritual Industrial Complex. He talked about how if communism was a disease, then religion was the inoculation. So Herzog says secular democracy would fail in defeating the Red Scourge, but democracy grounded in religious foundation would triumph. Religious Americans were immune from communist infiltration and conversion. So this brings me to the first of my alternative gospels, represented in the Jesus-adjacent film, the anti-fascist, anti-communist gospel. And this is Quo Vadis, which came out in 1951. At the beginning of the film, we see a Roman legion marching on the Appian Way, led by Marcus Vinicius, played by Robert Taylor, and a voiceover narration that sets the scene. It says, Imperial Rome is at the center of the empire, undisputed master of the world. But with this power inevitably comes corruption. No man is sure of his life. The individual is at the mercy of the state. That any force on earth can shake the foundations of this pyramid of power and corruption seems inconceivable. Then it cuts away to a shot of Jesus carrying the cross, his face blocked from view. And it says, but 30 years before this day, a man died to make men free, to spread the gospel of love and redemption. Soon that humble cross is destined to replace the proud eagles that top the Roman standards. This is the story of that immortal conflict. So the film sets up a conflict between freedom and tyranny. It's 1951, so it could be looking back to World War II or could be looking forward to the Cold War conflict. One of the lines is that Jesus died to make men free. Does anyone know where that line comes from? You can just shout it out.
Glory, glory, hallelujah.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. It comes from the Battle Hymn of the Republic. So the actual line is, as he died to make us holy, let us die to make men free. Okay. So there's this American liberty and Christian doctrine of salvation are kind of being smushed together in this narration. And those two ideas are not the same thing, right? So they're both nice ideas, but they're not the same thing. So in terms of choice, not to show Jesus fully in the flashback, previous versions of Quo Vadis had no problem with this. There's a 1913 version and a 1925 version, again, going back to these silent films that later films were made of. No problem showing Jesus is from the front, okay? So the climactic moment from Quo Vadis is when Jesus is leaving Rome in order to avoid being killed by Nero. And he encounters Jesus and he asks him, Quo Vadis Domine, or where are you going, Lord? And Jesus responds, I'm going to Rome to be crucified again. And Peter takes that as a sign that he should return to Rome and face his fate. And again, in the silent films, they have no problem with this. They do a double exposure effect with this ghostly Jesus walking directly towards Peter. In the 1951 version, Peter is walking with a young disciple and sees a bright light and says, Christ Jesus, you are here, which is helpful because otherwise, how would we know? And so he says, Quo Vadis Domine, and then the young disciple begins to speak. My people in Rome have need of thee. If thou desert my people, I shall go to Rome to be crucified a second time. Then the boy kind of comes to, and he has no memory of speaking these words. So in this film, Jesus has a teenage boy do the talking for him. So this is a way of just avoiding even showing Jesus at all in the film. What you really remember when you watch Quo Vadis is Nero, who's played by Peter Ustinov. He's this flamboyant, infantile megalomaniac. The burning of Rome is set up as an act of performance art. And the resistance of the Christians to his blaming them for the fire is ultimately what leads to his downfall. So it's the faith of the Christians is important mostly as a resistance to Nero's tyranny. At the end, we get kind of a bookend shot as the forces of General Galba march on Rome to install the general as emperor. And there's a conversation between Marcus Vinicius and his friend Fabius. And Marcus says, Babylon, Egypt, Greece, Rome, what follows? And Fabius says, a more permanent world, I hope, or a more permanent faith. Marcus says, one is not possible without the other. So in Quo Vadis, some kind of religion is proposed as the basis for a more stable and free society. It's hinted that that is Judeo-Christianity, but in the end, not specifically named. And to paraphrase Eisenhower, Rome was founded on a deeply felt religious faith, and I don't care what that is. The next one is The Big Fisherman. And this is what I call the gospel in the nuclear age. Will Herberg noted that the sense of insecurity in post-war life that came with the threat of nuclear war. And facing this fear, he said, Americans saw religion as the best hope of peace in this day. So this message of peace between nations with an understanding that regional conflicts could spiral out of control was the theme of this Jesus adjacent film, The Big Fisherman, released by Buena Vista Studios in 1959. So it's supposed to be about Peter. It really has a very convoluted plot. There's an Arabian princess named Farah and a prince named Voldy, and it's brought up that the Arabs and the Galileans have a blood feud. And so it's like 40 minutes into the film before Simon Peter even shows up, even though it's supposed to be about him. And so basically, the Christ of the Big Fisherman is the most remote of the Jesus adjacent films. He's simply called the preacher or the Nazarene. We never see him more than as a hand or a little bit of a robe. The film changes the order of the Gospels and shows Peter attending the Sermon on the Mount before Jesus calls him as a disciple. And the sermon is delivered by a disembodied voice in Middle American English, following the King James text. Ye hath heard that it hath been said, thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thine enemy. You know, that kind of language, all right? It sounds like a very bad reading of a scripture on a Sunday service. So there's a long kind of convoluted plot where the Romans come, they try to take the Arab prince and the princess away back to Arabia. And basically the blood feud between the Galileans and the Arabians comes, and the Arabians comes forward. So then he says, at one point, this gives Peter an opportunity to preach the gospel of peace from the Nazarene. And he says, give here, Roman, if anyone becomes an enemy of everyone else and all start killing each other, there'd soon be none of us left. And all the things that heaven has provided for us would be wasted. And I don't think that's a good idea. So that's his summary of the gospel right there. He actually takes the princess back across the Sea of Galilee to Arabia. We wonder if he's ever going to start following Jesus or do anything having to do with the gospel. And then he says, it is the master's hope to heal the hatreds of all peoples. Are there any more bitter than those of Arabia and Galilee? And so at this point, we're supposed to think, yes, the Arab-Israeli conflict. Suddenly we get it. We get what this is all about. So when Peter preaches the gospel of peace, it's very big on language like fellow man and heaven, which is very practical, but has very little to do with the contradictory and apocalyptic teaching of Jesus Christ. So this is what I call the gospel of peace in a nuclear age, is kind of looking at this anxiety around world conflict. All right. So the next one is what I call the existential or identity gospel. Will Herberg says, religion is an inexpugnable citadel of the self in a world in which personal authenticity is threatened from every side. The turn to religion owes much of it to the search for a new and more viable philosophy of existence. Okay, so the example, Ben-Hur is a good example of this. You kind of have Ben-Hur going through this journey of kind of being thrown from pillar to post, the Roman Empire, working with the Arabs, becoming a charioteer, all of this kind of thing. So you get this search for identity in Ben-Hur. Another really cool one that does this is Barabbas, which follows Barabbas after he is freed from he's pardoned instead of Jesus. And this one has a really cool Jesus adjacent shot, which was actually a shot of the crucifixion, which was shot during a full solar eclipse. So it's a pretty cool movie to check out. But one of my favorites is of the kind of this character is Salome. And this was in 1953 starring Rita Hayworth. The particular problem was, how do you make a film in which Salome is the heroine under the production code? The code has no objection to portraying Christ, but it did have rules about sexy dances. And so the obvious answer is you have to change the story. Whatever's in the Bible, you got to change it because Salome must somehow do her dance, not out of lust or revenge, but for the greater good. In order to get Salome to the dance sequence, the screenwriters developed this convoluted plot. Princess Salome was sent away from Galilee as a girl to Rome. As a young woman, she returns to Galilee and reunites with her mother, Herodias, played by Dame Judith Anderson. She meets her lecherous stepfather, Herod, played by Charles Laughton. She also has this man, played by Stuart Granger, Commander Claudius, who is a secret Roman convert to Christianity. So John the Baptist has been preaching against Herod and Herodias and says they're evil. Salome confronts John, stands up for her mother. Herod has John locked up, but he doesn't want to kill him. So Herodias asks Salome to perform a dance for Herod to convince him to have John executed. Pretty, so far so good, right? Kind of lines up with the Bible. But then at this point, Salome realizes John was right and her mother is evil. And so she resolves to dance for Herod, but to try to convince the king not to have John executed. So now you can make Salome's dance as sexy as you want, right? Because she's dancing to save the life of John the Baptist. And so Rita Hayworth was a great dancer. And so it's this very sexy and alluring dance. It's as far as they could go in terms of making it look like a strip tease in a 1950s movie. But before Salome can make her plea for John's life, Herod is frozen in this kind of libidinous state by the dance. And he makes this faithful pronouncement where he says, I'd give half my kingdom. And Herodias replies, no, bring me the head of the Baptist. And Herod sheepishly agrees. By the time Salome is finished, John's head has already been served up on a silver platter. And she sees the silver charger and she screams. And then she screams in horror and she runs off. And now she's truly having an identity crisis. The film wants us to believe that Salome's a princess, but she's not a bad person. She now realizes her mother and stepfather are truly evil and she can't be a part of what they're doing. So Salome and her Christian boyfriend Claudius leave the court of Herod and join Jesus and attend the Sermon on the Mount. So try to find a biblical reference to that one. This is a typical Jesus adjacent representation. His hands and robes are shown. At some point, he's actually just a painting. It almost looks like AI. And instead of the typical closing title saying the end, the title says, this was the beginning. So by the end of the movie, thanks to the production code, Salome has become a wholesome and humbler follower of Christ in complete contradiction to what's actually in the Bible. So I hope this makes it clear what I'm talking about in terms of Jesus adjacent films. Jesus is a ghostly figure on the fringes of these films. He rarely interacts with the other characters. He's largely unnecessary to the plot and the film or the theology of the film, such as it is. As with Herberg's assertion, the 1950s Americans worship their own worshiping. Hollywood portrayed Jesus not as he is portrayed in the Gospels, but as an idea or a symbol of the broad-based civil religion of Judeo-Christianity. So, thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Do you have time for a couple of questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I'll start off then, I guess. Now I was just wondering, and thank you for that excellent walk through Hollywood's interpretation of religion and Judeo-Christian history. Do you think that in their attempts to portray the Word of God, the Bible, even with all the chicanery involved, do you think it had an effective role in evangelizing people who maybe never read the Bible or never knew? Do you think it had a role in that, or do you think it was really just pure entertainment and didn't really do anything to drive the Christian faith among the masses?
Yeah. That's a good question. I mean, I think it's hard to prove if it converted anyone. I think it's sort of like this was just it was so ingrained in the culture at this point. You know, these were the big prestige films that Hollywood was coming out with. They were the films that were nominated for Oscars. You know, of course, Ben-Hur won 11 Oscars, which has never been surpassed. It's been matched by Titanic and Lord of the Rings, but it's never been matched or surpassed. These were, it was, I think it was part of just this whole kind of, you know, civil religion of Judeo-Christianity. And I think everybody was just kind of expected to go along with that at that time in the 50s and in going into the 60s. And so I think there's certainly an equivalency that a lot of people make between these films and the Bible. I think that people kind of the film becomes a kind of scripture to people, and there isn't a lot of let's say distance that people put in their own minds between the films and the text of the Bible itself. So I think that certainly for people who grew up watching these films, it really became scripture to them. And so then what's fascinating about that to me, and that's kind of what my book is about, is like that you get all this crazy stuff, the dancing girls and the casts of thousands and the gigantic sets and whatever. And somehow that just kind of populates our imagination as to what the Bible looks like.
Yeah.
I sort of came up in the 70s and 80s, and I still think that a lot of the big thing that came out in 1977 was Jesus of Nazareth. And that was a massive television spectacle. And I remember watching that as a kid. And I still think a lot of my concept of the Bible comes from that miniseries, whether I even think of it or not. It's just that it's very hard for me to even like imagine a world that doesn't look like that. So yeah, I think it definitely populates our mind with images. Yeah.
Richard, Patty, the gallery, the Blackfriars Gallery, you and Chris and others have been putting in a tremendous amount of time trying to curate and catalog. When people visit that gallery, they don't get the wonderful historic perspective that you have given us today. What do they get when people visit the gallery?
Well, Father Chris puts up these incredible exhibitions every semester at DSPT. And so some of them have been film based. Some of them have been are based on some of the other arts that are collected as part of the gallery. And so, but he does a fantastic job curating these and getting all of the context and putting all the context together for when people go and visit the displays. And so part of the reason why we did the podcast was so that we had a you know kind of a good kind of historic arc, at least for the first, you know, I don't know, first 60 or so years or 70 or so years of film. So that if somebody went online and you took a look at these, and that the podcast would address sort of what the background is. So that's part of it. It's kind of a multi-pronged approach to getting educational materials out there that go along with the posters and go along with the offerings of the gallery. They had this fantastic display last year that was with another school that's part of the GTU consortium, the Jesuit School of Theology, that had to do with pilgrimage, and also had to do with films dealing with pilgrimage. So we had a bunch of these movie posters that could be worked into pilgrimage. I don't know, Chris, do you want to talk to any of that?
Excuse me, maybe I would just add, yeah, the purpose of the gallery is not just to display art, but to provide educational resources, a didactic purpose, if you will, that engages not just the students who come to the school, but the local culture. So the gallery is open, so people can come by, and we have, as you would at any gallery or museum, we have, you know, signage on the walls that explains whatever the theme is. with this last exhibition that Richard just mentioned, one of my colleagues at the one of the other schools, her expertise is pilgrimage and Christian culture. So as Richard demonstrated, the collection is multivalent. You can do hundreds of different things with it because of the way that Father Michael collected all these pieces. So you have a fixed number of pieces, but you have 100 stories that you can tell with those pieces. So this exhibition we did last semester on pilgrimage, we did a film series with it as well too. So we had different kinds of films that related in one way or another to the topic at hand.
Any other questions from the audience?
I don't have a question, but I think it's interesting. I don't even know how to phrase it. It might be more about literacy, 20th century. If a book, a published book was worth anything at all, okay, if it made any money at all, it eventually frequently, very frequently was turned into a film. And I've always been interested in classic films since I was in high school. So this is kind of real technical this morning or specific. But yeah, I guess I just want to make the point that I've noticed that any book that was worth anything within 2 years was turned into a film, and it was like big negotiations and percentages, and I don't even know what the equivalent of that would be now, say in 2025, because the world has changed so much and people's preferences for entertainment have changed. I guess I want to make an observation, not so much a question. So that the Bible is one of those books is not surprising, I don't think. If you wanted fodder, if you wanted, subject matter, go to the Bible and just extract whatever you could, and, make tons of money.
Yeah. Well, and speaking to that, the Bible had two advantages, maybe three. One was that the stories were familiar to a lot of people. And again, we're talking about a culture that maybe was a little more monolithic at the time, maybe there wasn't as much, let's say, diversity of people of different religious backgrounds in the country at the time. It was assumed people were sort of familiar with the Bible and familiar with Christian stories. And it's the best-selling book of all time, right? So you talk about bestsellers. You got plenty of people who bought the Bible or seen the Bible or at least are somewhat familiar with it. And then the third thing was it's not copyrighted. So you didn't have to go through all that negotiation process. One of the first lawsuits that was ever filed having to do with a work of fiction was for Ben-Hur. And somebody made a silent version of Ben-Hur. It was made in Long Island. They had some local firemen do the chariot race on a beach in Long Island. And it was the first time that, and then, this was like 1907 or something like that. Ben-Hur was a hugely popular book. It was one of those books that, was, best-selling book besides the Bible, from the late 19th century into the 20th century. And everybody wanted to see a movie version of it. So some people thought, oh, we'll just make a movie version of it. But then they were sued by the Lew Wallace estate. And so then, suddenly they had to deal with these issues. It kind of established that, okay, if you're going to make a movie about something, you got to get rights to it first. So in today's language, we would call Ben-Hur a really big IP, a really big intellectual property that can get remade over and over and over again. And actually, there was a version that was made just a few years ago with Joseph Fiennes. So the Bible has that advantage of being available and being popular.
Richard, Chris, did you have anything? Oh, is there another question?
Yes. And I hope you.
Yeah. It's okay. Early in your talk, you spoke of religion becoming the faith. Yeah, I mean, almost supplanting the Bible, almost supplanting the Christ.
Mhm.
And I really resonate with that. And I guess the question is, how did Hollywood almost support and feed that? It's if that makes any sense at all, because I
Yeah.
grew up with religion as the faith.
Yeah.
More than you. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. So a lot of what there's a couple ways of seeing that. I mean, I think post-war, after World War II, there were a lot of efforts that were being made by the government and by entertainment and by everybody to really promote religion, as a means of you know preventing communism, preventing kind of foreign influence. But it kind of didn't matter. It could be Christianity, but if you're Jewish, that was okay too. Maybe you're a Unitarian. I mean, it's like it was sort of like what we have is faith, and our faith will see us through any of these kind of global conflicts or these cultural conflicts. And the Hollywood was very much a part of that. They were very much on board with doing that. And the other thing was that, when you had in the 1940s and 50s, there was suspicion that Hollywood was maybe a front for communism. And so you had directors and actors and being hauled before the House Un-American Activities Committee and having to testify and name names. So this was a way, if you're putting together these, kind of Christian-esque films, it's a way of kind of getting the pressure off of them, and saying, "Hey, look at this. We're doing good stuff. Don't worry about it. We're on board with the whole thing." So does that kind of
That's-
answer what your experience was?
That's
Yeah,
helpful. The Red Scare was big.
it really was.
Oh, it's huge, yeah. And
Yeah.
it's interesting, I've just been reading, in the exodus from the East Coast to the West in the late teens and early twenties,
Mhm.
almost without exception, all the studio heads, okay, including the four Warner brothers, were all Jewish.
Yes.
It's just interesting.
Yeah.
They,
Yeah.
you know,
And
There's-
immigrants, they were immigrants too.
right, immigrant, exactly.
Yeah. It was there's a book, I can't remember the author of it, but it's called An Empire of Their Own, which addresses the Judaism of the all of the founders and of the big studios. And you know, some of that just had to do with demographics and had to do with, the types of industries they were in, that they could move from whatever they were doing before to doing film industry. But yeah, that's a major part of the story as well.
I think if I could jump in, one aspect of all of this that really Richard's brought forth well, and the last question just sort of addressed, is this ongoing dynamic relationship between religion and culture. And you see this since the beginning of recorded history, basically, that especially with regard to power and formation of a society, beginnings of Christianity are a great example of that. You have Constantine in the 4th century, who becomes the emperor of Rome. He's not yet Christian, but has a vision, has an experience. So there's an authenticity to his personal experience, but then at the same time, he sees political advantages to allowing Christianity to become a state religion, if you will. And it goes on from there for another 2,000 years, basically. So there's always this dynamic, and it goes both ways too. So you can have a religious ritual in the Christian world, for example, beginning of November, we have what we call All Saints Day, November 1st, the day before. All Hallows Eve, the preparation becomes Halloween as a secularized example of that. And if you pay attention, there's still ritual behavior around Halloween. It's not religious, but it's ritual. And that's because that's what we humans do. We are engaged, we need to be engaged in ritual behavior so that we can do abstract thinking, basically. But it's just part of who we are. So this dynamic that we've been looking at this morning through the lens of film, you could see in architecture, you could see in painting, you could see in three-dimensional art, because that's how we communicate with each other for the deeper things that we value.
Were these films of the fifties, as popular and profitable in, let's say, Western European theater as they were in the United States?
I have to believe so. I think they were. Because I think even at that time, Hollywood was a global industry. So I think they were definitely importing these to Western Europe, certainly to any of the English-speaking countries. And because a lot of the examples that we have of the posters do come from other countries. So I mean, you know, they're American films that are Hollywood-made films, but it just so happens that the poster is for the release that took place in Spain, or the release that took place in France or Belgium, or the Netherlands, or something like that.
Right.
So it would seem, based on our collection, that they were very successful in other countries.
Yes.
So, Dr. Lindsay, I want to thank you again for this fascinating walk through biblical cinematic history. It is really interesting, and really fascinated by the work you are doing, Chris is doing. And on behalf of all of us here at the Presbyterian Church in Morristown, I want to thank you for your time and your excellent presentation.
Thank you. Yeah. And if you want more of it, if you're interested in this and this kind of piques your interest, please check out the podcast. It's really interesting, and it's kind of take you through, each episode's about an hour long, and it'll take you through kind of this whole history. If you just happen to be driving around or whatever, and you want to listen to something, it's really very good.
I don't know about the rest of you, but that's what I'm doing the rest of the day. Like,
Thank you.
thank
Chris,
you.
thank you.
Thank you,
Yes.
ladies.
Yeah, thank you, Chris.
All right.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.